Good morning, lovelies! In this video, we will be discussing World Building 101. That is, the different styles of world building, whether you should start with the world or the story, and some ways to get started. I want to be clear here, this is not a, here's how to create the perfect world for your fantasy story and every single question that you need to ask yourself. No, world building is a lot. Alright, you are creating an entire world, in some cases an entire universe that does not even exist, with multiple things to consider, especially if you're going for the more gritty realism. Those include, but are not limited to, climate, geography, fantasy or alien races, creatures and monsters, plant life and ecology, government systems, religion, magic systems, technology, history, gender, and so much more. I cannot do all that in one video. I am amazing, but I am not all powerful. Instead, this video will be the start of a playlist where each video will cover a different piece of the world building process. I already covered magic systems in a previous video, which I'll link in the corner there, and I will be covering all of those other topics that I mentioned in great detail in individual videos in this playlist. And if you have a suggestion for a topic, add it to the comments so that I can put it on the list. Thank you. Before we get started, remember to click that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any of those videos. I post every Sunday. You can also follow me on social media. All those links are in the description. All right, let's get started, shall we? Earlier in my magic systems video, I mentioned that those systems exist on a scale between hard and soft, where a hard magic system has stricter rules and limits that are communicated clearly to the reader, while soft magic systems are loose and undefined. The same goes for world building. Hello Future Me has a whole video on this, which I will link in the description and encourage you to check out because every sci-fi and fantasy author should subscribe to him. He is amazing. But I will summarize his point here. In the West, hard world building has become very popular thanks in large part to Tolkien. The fantasy and sci-fi worlds in our books have rich, detailed histories that are not only communicated to the reader, but vital to understanding the story. A prime example is the Game of Thrones series, where George R. R. Martin goes through great lengths to tell us how every aspect of every culture works because it's that relevant to the story. Softer world building would be something like Ghibli movies. We see the magic and spirits and gods and other parts of the world, but they're not fully explained. This lends an air of mystery and wonder and whimsy to these worlds. This isn't just for fantasy either, and it's not just for that, oh, what a beautiful magic world theme, if that's what you're going for. No, a prime example of soft world building in science fiction is Rick and Morty. We get whole planets and alien species, like just one after another in almost every single episode. And there's even an episode where a minor character is scolding Rick for saying how he comes from a whole culture and has an entire history which we know nothing about because it's not relevant to the story. It's not relevant to Rick, and the writers chose a soft world building approach. This works because the core of the story is not about exploring and understanding alien worlds. It's about Rick and the dynamic he has with his family. Everything else is just background noise. This also works for the show's theme of nihilism and the universe doesn't matter, it doesn't care about you, so just go do your thing. Soft world building is really great for themes of mystery and wonder if you're going for a more Ghibli approach, or chaos and nihilism for a Rick and Morty approach. Just for the love of God, don't pull a Rowling and try to clarify certain points of your soft world building after the book is published. Just don't do it. Just don't. Figuring out if you're going to go with a hard or soft approach to world building will help you determine how much you have to intimately understand and communicate to your audience, and how much you can just hand wave. Even the harshest, strictest version of world building still requires some suspension of disbelief, especially in fantasy. That's the whole point we read fantasy. Realism is great and all, but at some point, you as the author get to say, the water in my oceans is purple, and the sky is purple, and the grass is purple because I'm the author and I like purple, suck it up. I want to stress something very clearly here. Internal consistency is far more important than external logic. Realism is great and all, but that's a secondary concern. alright? No matter how weird or wild or crazy your world building is, it can still work if it is internally consistent. We clear on that? Cool, great. Moving on. In the writing community, there are two camps of world building. Do you world build first and then write the story, or do you write the story first and then world build as you go along? Tell me which one you do in the comments. This usually falls in the planner versus pantser group. Most planners, that is people who outline stories before writing them, also world build before they write the story, while most pantsers just say fuck it and make the world up as they write the story. I don't understand pantsers at all. Like, if I personally don't have at least minimum, a bare bones outline and some notes on the world, I go insane. I freeze up. I just can't do it. I'm a planner through and through. So there's going to be a little bit of that bias in this video and probably in this entire playlist. I found out that my mom is a pantser a little while ago. It fucked me up. There are benefits and drawbacks, of course, to each approach. If you start with your world building before your story, that is, you plan the world and then you write the story, this saves you time later having to do research or look up some obscure fact about the breaking point of steel swords, especially for those going for a more realism-based approach. You don't have to make something up on the spot. You've already done all the heavy lifting of research and creation. Now you just have to write what your characters are doing in this world that you have created. You've basically set up the set and you've leashed your characters onto this world and are writing up the incident report. The downside is that it can be very hard to know when to stop world building and start writing. World building does not have a clear endpoint. You could theoretically never stop building your world, because it's a whole world. I know authors who have spent months doing this, which frankly is way too long. A great way to curtail this is to give yourself a hard deadline. I usually go with 3 or 4 days maximum before I say that's enough, I need to start actually writing this damn thing. Another downside for the planning approach is that some authors, especially fantasy authors, bend their story in a way to show off their world rather than letting the world act as a natural backdrop for their story. The unfortunate truth is that you're never going to be able to share every single detail about your beautiful fantasy world in the story. Publish an almanac if you're super passionate about it, but don't punish your story just to show off your world. That problem is of course immediately curtailed if you're the type of person who starts writing a story without doing the world building first. You know exactly what your story needs from the world and how much detail is needed because you're starting with the story itself. You also don't lose a month of your life studying ancient Mesopotamian rituals because you want to base your society off of them. The downside is that it can be a lot more intimidating writing a fantasy or sci-fi story without doing the world building first, because you're doing both at once rather than one at a time. It's also very easy to get distracted from writing your manuscript because a lot of times you have to stop mid-chapter to do whatever research you have to do about the technology or architecture of the time period you're going for, and that can break your momentum. And it's easier for plot holes to slip through the cracks here, the type of plot holes that come from intrinsic world building problems. Everyone writes differently. I'm not gonna tell a pantser to produce a detailed report of their fantasy regime's government system. However, I would recommend that you have at least a general idea of how your world works before you start writing. It'll save a lot of problems later on. Basically, just answer these quick questions. Who is in charge and why? What is something unique about this world that sets it apart from the others? And what is something that this world does not have? Branch off from there, go forth and conquer. Alright, let's say for all intents and purposes that you are a planner like me and you want to build your world and culture before writing. There, again, we have two schools of thought. Climate first, or ground up, or culture first, that is, you start with the aesthetic and then you work backwards. I practice both of these in any given story, and this is how I personally handle it. Again, everyone's got a different process. Please share yours in the comments. Alright, so a little while ago, I was outlining this story that I've since put on the back burner. But I knew it took place in a world that was very, very cold, where like winter lasts 9 months and summer 3. I live in Minnesota, so basically I was just taking our temperature and like cranking it up to 11. So what I did was a general sweep of cultures on Earth that live in similar conditions. So like northern Russia, northern Europe, Mongolia, the indigenous tribes of Alaska and northern Canada, that type of thing. I noticed that a lot of these groups are nomadic, like they'll follow certain animals or stay away from areas that flood or melt in the summer before coming back in the winter. They have a very protein heavy diet because you can't really do a whole lot of farming when there's snow and ice on the ground, and that their clothing is of course super thick and layered because we as humans only have skin and a little bit of fur on our heads and not much else. With the climate first approach, the ground up approach, you want to look for universals of what humans need to survive in that type of climate. How do they get food? How do they clothe themselves? And where do they find shelter? You can then build out from there, using real-world cultures in those environments as guides whenever you need additional inspiration. Alternatively, you could work backwards. Let's say for a fact that you know your culture has to be nomadic traders because of plot and/or character backstory, whatever. Basically, you have your aesthetic, and now you need to work backwards to create their culture and history. Ask yourself, why are they nomadic instead of agricultural? Is it because the climate doesn't allow it? Or perhaps they've been persecuted, chased from their homeland? In which case, why is that? Who's chasing them? If you have a specific aesthetic in mind for these nomads, such as light flowing robes with bright colors and patterns, that's automatically going to mean a temperate climate with easy access to dyes. That is, the plants or animals that produce those dyes and the plants or animals that create those specific materials. You don't have to justify everything. Humans do weird things sometimes for no apparent reason, but you should be able to justify how and why your culture collects food, seeks shelter, clothes themselves, and otherwise prevents themselves from dying. I want to emphasize researching real-world cultures for this. Even if you don't plan on using those specific cultures that you research as inspiration for your story, studying general history and/or anthropology will give you a good grounding of how civilizations and people groups work. Those are my world building tips, just some things to consider and keep in mind as you're creating your fantasy or alien culture. Everyone does it differently and everyone's process evolves over time, so tell us a bit about yours in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss another. The next addition to this playlist specifically will be fantasy and alien races, so stay tuned for that. If you want early access to these videos and other free goodies, you can support me over on Patreon. I also, of course, just opened up that merch store. All the profits go to helping me create these videos for you. The links are in the description. Bye, lovelies.